There's more land dedicated to paved surfaces than there are parks in the city of Richmond. Huge swaths of our community are without easy access to a park. And so in 2020, the Stoney administration, one of the probably lasting legacies of their administration is going to be dedicating 5 new parcels of city surplus land as new parks for the Parks, Recreation, and Community Facilities Department. And so right now, there is visioning going on for what those parks look like through the Richmond Parks Inspire. So your listeners can participate in that, speak what you would like to see into reality through the Parks and Recreation Department.
You're listening to America's Healthiest City on Mike King Biz Radio Network on ESPN Richmond 106.1 and Choice 105.3.
Good morning and welcome to America's Healthiest City on ESPN Richmond 106.1, part of the Mike King Biz Media Network. I'm your host, Will Melton, and if you're tuning in for the very first time, please visit americashealthiestcity.com to learn about our 10-year community partnership to make all of Richmond the healthiest in America by 2033. There are a lot of ideas on our ideas board, and you can check out what it's going to take for us to get there. But the number one key is that we're all working together in the same direction at the same time. It's impossible if we don't. Today in the studio, I have Jeremy Hoffman, PhD. He is the Director of Climate Justice and Impact at Groundwork USA. He has made a tremendous mark on the Richmond community through his work in academia and through the Science Museum. So I'm super excited about this conversation. I've been trying to nail you down for quite a while. I cannot remember now who it was that referred you, but I'm sure by now it's been a couple of folks. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's great to finally be able to get here into the studio with you. So I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, well, you have, as I mentioned, you've done a lot here in the community, and you've been an educator for a long time. You were, a student for a long time to be able to get there. But you've also been doing a lot of work. So, I want to start out with the same question that we ask everybody. Are you native to Richmond, or did you move here? And if so, what brought you?
I am an adopted son of Richmond now. I grew up in Iowa. Well, I was born in Chicago, moved to Iowa when I was 10 years old, then stayed in the Midwest through my undergraduate degree at Augustana College in Rock Island, Illinois. Got really fascinated in climate research in college, then moved to Corvallis, Oregon to do my PhD at Oregon State. While I was at Oregon State, I learned about how passionate I was for sharing my knowledge and trying to kind of inspire people to see the world differently through science, especially environmental science. And it was there that I learned about this kind of crazy career path you can take to go to a science museum and design learning experiences for people. And so I took a chance on a small but mighty science museum in Richmond, Virginia, and moved here pretty much without ever visiting before in September of 2016. So we're nearing a decade of living here in Richmond and serving the community in a variety of different capacities.
You've got me beat by a little bit less than a year. I moved here in 2017. In the CNN video that was shot saying that Richmond is the best city to visit in America, Hamilton Glass said that Richmond is a place where creators come to make things happen. What about Richmond made you stay after you moved here and found out what it was all about?
The thing that really set Richmond's environmental world apart, I think, in some ways, because at that time in 2016, a lot of communities were finally starting to really grapple with what local climate action looked like. We were coming up on decades of research with very little progress at the federal international level, the national international level. So there was this swing towards very highly localized climate adaptation and mitigation planning. And so at that time when I moved here, the city elected LeVar Stoney, who took it on his administration to start the RVA Green 2050 planning process, which was originally just a greenhouse gas mitigation plan. And it was very ambitious even for that time. But kind of simultaneously, there are all these environmental nonprofits that were doing really amazing work in things like green infrastructure, parks access, tree planting, groups like Groundwork RVA, which led to my job at Groundwork USA in the last year and a half. And so it was this amalgamation of very highly impactful organizations that were all working to improve the environmental quality of Richmond's neighborhoods that I started to kind of link together through projects starting in 2017 and then, kind of rolling like a snowball after our initial heat mapping campaign in 2017. So really the success of that project and bringing together these organizations that are built by and for the people of Richmond and continue to make huge impacts and progress at that local level is really what has kept me here and will continue to keep me here for as long as they'll have me.
So I happen to know a little bit about this space. My firm is fortunate to be redesigning the website for Groundwork RVA, and I had the opportunity to be a student with Rob, the executive director there, through Leadership Metro Richmond in 2020. And we were privy to the heat mapping project then, and it's part of the learning that goes on in Quest to this day. For our listeners' sake, can you talk a little bit about the heat mapping project, and what did you guys learn? What resource was created as a result of that project, and how is that impacting communities today?
Yeah, so I start any conversation about this with really just kind of like something that we can all relate to. Whether we get off the bus or get off our bike or get out of our car in the middle of the summer in a totally empty parking lot, just think of it like going to Target or some store that has this like massive parking lot, and that uncomfortable feeling of, this is like walking around outside in someone else's mouth, that really like, hot, humid air. Is one experience. And then on the flip side of that, imagine getting off the bus or off your bike or out of your car and walking into one of Richmond's, world-class parks, and it's super shady and you get that relief from the, really powerful heat here in the Southeast. That kind of juxtaposition between those two extremes is really what defines what we call the urban heat island effect, where human landscapes where we've built up things like parking lots, buildings made out of very dark, hard surfaces, those sorts of things, actually absorb more of the sun's energy throughout the day and then re-emit it back into the air in the afternoon and into the evening. And what that does is to artificially, well, not really even artificially, really lift the air temperature in those places several degrees higher than what it would be just a few blocks away in a city park. Now, what that has been around for over 100 years. We've actually, known about the urban heat island effect for a really long time. But what we didn't know a lot about was by how much does air temperature vary within the same small space, like a city like Richmond, which is relatively small in area. How much does temperature vary in the hottest time of the year? And so collaborating with my colleague Vivek Chandas at Portland State University, who had put together the kind of technology side of things, how to put a really reliable thermometer on a car, on a bike, along with a GPS unit, which is keeping track of where you are in space really accurately. He had kind of come up with a method by which you dispatch people in cars during a heat wave or on bikes riding around during a heat wave to measure the city's temperature. And they had never really done that very much in other places. So we set out in July of 2017 to do it here in the Southeast for the first time. And the thing that we did differently here in Richmond was to build that kind of coalition of community organizations that would actually make up our volunteer team. So the kind of technique is called community science. Basically what we did was dispatch these volunteers all over the city. We found a 16 degree Fahrenheit difference between two places at the exact same time during a heat wave. So the numbers that we found was like somebody in Scott's Addition or in Manchester would be experiencing 103 degrees Fahrenheit when someone in the 4th district, kind of southwestern Richmond, or in one of the really shady parks is feeling 87 degrees Fahrenheit. Wow. I mean, that's a huge difference. Yeah. And so that, I think the fact that not only we had so many people involved, we had youth and students from university and adults. We had a whole really cool group of people going around doing this. But then on top of that, we had an exact number to tell people, like, no kidding, this is how extreme it can get. That map has now been used in dozens of different things over the years, from reports for the state of housing quality in particular neighborhoods to health reports. We've published a bunch of papers on the health burden of extreme heat. Other groups, it's found its way into the Richmond 300 Comprehensive Master Plan. It serves as one of the main, data sets for tracking the progress on RVA Green 2050. And it's been integrated into a variety of different school curricula, either at the elementary school, middle school, high school, and I teach it along with several of my colleagues at University of Richmond and Virginia Commonwealth University. So it's kind of weird. Rob Jones is actually someone that says, 10 years ago, nobody knew about this thing, the urban heat island effect, and it was Richmond that did it. And I think in many ways, a lot of people do think of Richmond as where this work really took off. Not necessarily began, but certainly picked up a lot of steam.
I want to talk more about the impacts and implications of that, but we can take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll dive more into Groundwork USA.
Thank you for listening to America's Healthiest City on Mike King Biz Radio Network.
When we asked ourselves, what could we do to stop the tide of plastic bottled water, we never thought we'd start a water brand. But an idea grew and Richmond Water was born. Now we're replacing single-use plastic on the shelf with collectible, refillable aluminum bottles of water. And we're installing refill stations throughout RVA, launching a movement to refill. It's your turn to make a splash. Find your bottle of Richmond Water or add refill stations to your next event at drinkrichmondwater.com.
That's kind of cool.
Welcome back to America's Healthiest City on ESPN Richmond 106.1 FM. You can catch us each week on Thursdays at 6 a.m. Catch us here on the network on ESPNRichmond.com, on YouTube, LinkedIn, and wherever you get your podcasts. We're live at 6 a.m. every Thursday. We're in the studio today with Jeremy Hoffman, I'm going to get this right, the Director of Climate Justice and Impact at Groundwork USA. And we were just talking about the urban heat island effect and the map that Groundwork USA worked to put together to map the geographical lines of these impacts. One of the things that I know that came out of this is that there's an outsized impact, negative impact on neighborhoods that were historically redlined, way back when. And we know that, as you were mentioning, that there are real health implications. So when we talk about equity, talk about equality, this is something that's really important, and I don't think we can talk enough about it. So do you have any kind of takeaways that people can think about, or perhaps some bridges to help people think about this idea?
Yeah. So going back to the example of the parking lot versus the park, even if you just look at a visual map, go on Google Maps and kind of zoom out on Richmond, and you can see the places where we have really mostly built up surfaces. You can see the parking lots. You can see the lack of trees. It turns out that the history of our city and cities all over the country kind of determined that almost 100 years ago. So there were decisions that were made by a few people that have affected many through the generations. And it echoes today as inequitable distributions of extreme heat. So, and while it's not the only example of this practice, most of the real estate and urban planning world in the 20th century was defined by looking at communities of color as less than, as something that was hazardous, that even proximity to neighborhoods of color was seen as a detrimental influence on your neighborhood. That largely then set off a sequence of additional policies and plans in the decades subsequent that further concentrated these sorts of built-up surfaces. Things like the interstate system was run through formerly redlined neighborhoods. Here in Richmond, I-64 and 95 cuts straight through Jackson Ward. And what are we doing now? We're talking about a park to cap the overpass, right? So the scars of those decisions still play out in the present day in a variety of different ways, including in other, non-environmental things, asthma rates, which is related to the social determinants of health and that proximity to traffic, There are large disparities in food access. Duran Chavis, another kind of visionary person from here in Richmond, helped me see the relationships between this heat island effect and a variety of other inequities in the city. And so really, when you look at the redlining map here and around the country, you can pretty much be certain that those neighborhoods that received red lines are also hotter during the summer, have higher rates of heat-related illness, higher rates of asthma, higher rates of cancer, higher rates of obesity, less home ownership, lower credit scores. It is quite literally such a fundamental treatment to these places that was almost a century ago playing out in the present day. And heat is just one way that we were able to kind of begin the conversation around not only environmental inequity, but then what does that mean from the lens of other sustainability kinds of positions like transit or walkability or food access. So really the heat island study, I didn't know at the time, was going to turn into a extremely useful framing by which to introduce a lot of other kind of social justice and racial justice issues within the lens of climate change justice. And so it's been really amazing to see how not only here in Richmond it's been used to advance equitable outcomes, but in people have used our method to map heat in over 75 communities nationwide now, and advance things like urban canopy plans, and transit improvements. I mean, it's really, really amazing to have had a hand in helping to guide that along.
I can only imagine that perhaps there's a silver lining to gentrification where people of means, people who know that the lived environment is going to impact them. I used to live in the north side, and every entrance to my neighborhood had a McDonald's in it. Now I live right next to 6495. It's literally at my condo level. And I think about these impacts, and I'm not immune to them because that's where I live. And so we're all dealing with these problems, and we all stand to benefit if we work to solve them. So let's talk about solutions. Talk a little bit about your work at Groundwork USA. What are you doing now to impact this? And how do you see, maybe the next 10 years of your life unfolding so that you can do the work that you're doing in a way that's gratifying and impactful?
The portfolio of work that Groundwork USA and the trusts, as they're referred to in our network, do is so varied and wonderful. It's hard to grasp, in a short amount of time. But I would encourage any listeners or people, listening in to go to groundworkusa.org, check out our State of the Network report, which you can find on the internet through our website, and learn about all the variety of different things going on, because it's staggering the amount of kind of community engaged participatory work that's going on. But to try and encapsulate it in a few words is really, we're kind of rooted in youth empowerment and youth development. So a lot of our programs are focused on what is known as the green team. And green teams are assembled, they're paid kind of internships for young people in these cities. The Groundwork Network operates in 21 cities currently around the country. And the Green Team is almost one of the most constant programs among those locations. And so youth get involved in things like neighborhood cleanups, building stormwater infrastructure like green infrastructure and things like that, learning about food access and land justice, and doing engagement with elderly residents to build and use air purifiers for high particulate pollution days, like during wildfire events. And then we have at the same time a really great program for kind of adult residents of neighborhoods, particularly ones that have been redlined, called our Climate Safe Neighborhoods program. And in many ways, some of the early work that we were doing here in Richmond helped inform what that program became at Groundwork USA. We called it Throwing Shade in RVA back then. But it was basically, unpacking the history of place with the folks that live there. Like, your neighborhood doesn't look like this by accident. The decisions that were made without you involved have made your city and your neighborhood hotter than others. You have fewer trees than others. You have more flooding than others because of these decisions. So let's get in on that information. Then the second step is to really show what sort of strategies for implementation would be, from planting a small urban garden, doing some sort of tree planting program, doing a pocket park, which we've done several around here in Richmond, and then really doing this kind of systems intervention stuff. So actually building the capacity of residents to participate in the civic system that has marginalized their neighborhood through inequitable distribution of resources and things like city budgets. So it's really this multi-year investment in transforming a small group of residents to take on the role of urban planning for their own neighborhood, so that their voice and vision is what is coming through in the big plans that then get passed that will define what their neighborhood looks like for the next 20 or 30 years. So Groundwork RVA has been super involved in things like the Richmond 300 plan and the RVA Green 2050 plan, and now is part of huge multi-million-dollar grants for the city of Richmond to do things like urban and community forestry. That's just one example of the kinds of programs that we do around the country, and it's truly every single day I get inspired by some new thing that I hear about. Some elderly resident from a public housing community putting a air quality monitor in their house and choosing to turn on an air purifier for the first time because they have now been informed by the data that our organization is able to provide for them. It's really amazing.
Wow. There's a lot of angles that we could go down here. I think, we'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about Richmond specifically and what our future looks like, and maybe share some ideas about ways that folks can get involved here in this community.
Great.
Thank you for listening to America's Healthiest City on Mike King Biz Radio Network.
Good morning and welcome back to America's Healthiest City on ESPN. I'm your host, Will Melton. If you're new to this program, please check out americashealthiestcity.com. We are inviting folks who represent businesses, nonprofits, institutions, academic institutions, and government institutions to see what it takes to become an ambassador. We invite you to participate. It doesn't cost a thing, and there are lots of ways that we can share your stories and ways that you're making an impact in our community. Today in the studio, I have Jeremy Hoffman. He works for Groundwork USA. He's the Director of Climate Justice and Impact, and we're having a great conversation about all of the learnings really over the last several years that are starting to pan out in projects and developments and things that are going to make our community healthier. I think a lot about the social determinants. We don't talk a lot about fitness and what we eat on this show. Obviously, those things really matter. But as you mentioned, the decisions that have taken place over a really long period of time ultimately make a lot of the decisions for our lived experience every day. I'm a big believer that the solutions that we introduce today shouldn't just be in response to things, but we can design them to solve multiple problems when we roll them out. So I'm curious, what are some ideas that you might inject on our ideas board that are ways that folks can get involved, whether it be small or maybe something more monumental that starts to move us in this direction or helps move us in that direction? One
of my most amazing facts that I say at dinner parties, or I don't think I go to dinner parties anymore, but when I talk to people at the bus stop or in my classes at VCU or U of R, is that there's more land dedicated to paved surfaces than there are parks in the city of Richmond. There's more land that's paved over than there is for parks in the city. And that is, even though we have some of the world's best parks, it's amazing. The James River Park system, for example, absolute, economy driver here for ecotourism and things like that. But huge swaths of our community are without easy access to a park. And so in 2020, in response to some of the work that we had done on the urban heat island effect and so on, the Stoney administration, one of the probably lasting legacies of their administration is going to be dedicating 5 new parcels of city surplus land as new parks for the Parks, Recreation, and Community Facilities Department. And so right now, there is visioning going on for what those parks look like through the Richmond Parks Inspire report or survey. So your listeners can participate in that, speak what you would like to see into reality through the Parks and Recreation Department. Also, there are opportunities to engage in visioning around some of these park spaces. So the Broad Rock Community Park is one such space. And then the Ernst Road location, I forget the exact location addresses, but through Parks and Recreation, they have been partnering with Groundwork RVA, with Southside Relief, which is another organization we haven't said yet on air, but also Virginia Community Voice, which is another Southside specific engagement and community-based organization. They're all being engaged with the residents around these parks to kind of guide what the programming looks like. What are the trails? What are the amenities? What are the things that your community wants in these spaces? Because it's the first time these areas have had a new park since the 70s. So this is a truly monumental time in Richmond's park and green space history that everyone can get involved in to help shape what it looks like now and into the future. So investing in time in our green spaces will ultimately make our communities much more climate resilient through providing those sorts of green, cool spaces. They soak up rainwater, they protect us from flooding, but they also provide opportunities for people to get outside, breathe fresh air, exercise, and if there are things like food forests and urban gardens incorporated, you get fresh food on as an added benefit. So truly, I think parks and green space are by far the most revolutionary thing that we could be doing in Richmond to secure the health and well-being of our residents now and into the future.
I just want a Ferris wheel on Mayo Island. That's all I'm asking for.
yeah. That's another. I mean, it's going to be amazing to see what happens with all of that. But a Ferris wheel, we don't see that many Ferris wheels locally, so who knows? Yeah. But see, put it in the report.
Yeah, I submitted it on social media, so we'll see if they drag it over there. All right, so something else that we look for from our guests is recommendations for other people in the community that are making a difference. And you're going to be hard-pressed to name somebody that has not been on the show, because everybody you've named so far today has been on the show. Except for, we didn't get Southside Relief yet or Virginia Community Voice, but maybe an individual or who should we talk to who you think is going to help us usher in this reality?
Man, I think that there are some really amazing, thoughtful folks that are being hired into the city's government right now. Young, forward-thinking people from other places. Like you and I are not, Richmond native, and I think that kind of outside perspective is really helpful. The Parks and Recreation Director, Chris Frelke, for example, he moved here from North Carolina. And look at all of the great things going on in the parks system, from partnerships with a Richmond Connects program to new community centers with really important community engagement to this Inspire program. I mean, that's a person that has truly had a really outsized imprint on the city in a very short amount of time. There are examples of those sorts of people all over the departments in the city government. Laura Thomas in the Office of Sustainability has been leading the RVA Green 2050 plan from within and really transforming the way that the city does things like grant opportunities. The Small Resilience Plan program has been giving out ARPA money, but then that's also now been renewed. And people, just up and down. Andy in the DPW, who does the traffic engineering and Vision Zero program. I think it's truly like giving. While we know, and I admire your program here because you have highlighted so many great community voices. It's like also there's the community voice of the people that work in the city are super important too. So I think that those folks, all these new really engaging folks at the city. Ryan Rinn would be another person who used to run Storefront for Metro Richmond. Just a truly thoughtful and kind human. And there are so many people up and down the departments now that I think giving them an opportunity to share a little bit about what they're excited about alongside the partnerships that they have with the people that have been on your show. We're really fortunate to live in Richmond at this time. And I'm really excited to see what happens in the next, over the next 10 years. It's going to be really amazing.
Well, how can folks get in touch with you? And
I'm super easy to find on social media. Super involved still on LinkedIn and on X, which was Twitter. You can also reach out to me through Groundwork USA, and I teach at the University of Richmond and VCU. So come and audit one of my classes. You can night class, learn a little bit, and then through my partnerships with Southside Relief, Groundwork RVA, and Happily Natural Day when I'm available. You can kind of find me in a variety of different places around the city.
Well, Jeremy Hoffman, thank you for joining us today in the studio. Very much enjoyed this conversation. We could spend another hour talking about all these topics, but I think your insights today are going to help our audience believe in this mission and maybe get involved a little bit more than they already are.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation. It's been great.
This was America's Healthiest City on ESPN. If you're just tuning in, please hop over to americashealthiestcity.com and subscribe to our podcast. If you do listen to podcasts, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. It'll help us get in front of more listeners here in Richmond. And catch us each week here on the network at 6 a.m. We'll catch you next week.